So it's no secret that the Marvel Cinematic Universe has seen better days. The reaction to most post-Endgame installments has drastically soured, and it's now showing at the box office, ratings, and even the goddamn Razzie Awards. But it was not always like this. These films used to inspire some level of excitement. To this day, people can still remember the character arcs of both Tony Stark and Steve Rogers. And the film that best exemplifies this is Civil War. So today, I'd like to examine a scene from Civil War and compare it to a similar scene in Falcon and Winter Soldier. Both attempt to settle a political debate. And I think it's time to do that with the new Captain America movie that's on the way. Before we dive into the scenes in particular, I think it's time we look at the context for both of these scenes. First, Civil War. 4 years after their initial formation in 2012, world governments and the general public are now demanding more accountability from the Avengers. Despite having saved the world multiple times, the heroes are now blamed for the deaths they indirectly caused during their missions. First, the Chitauri invasion. While all 6 heroes managed to stop Loki and the aliens from enslaving humanity, their methods involved sending the Hulk, an unstable force of nature, to deal with the Chitauri by smashing into buildings like a bulldozer.
And Hulk. Smash.
An action that was ultimately unnecessary in winning the battle. These can be tied not only to the Hulk, but also Steve and the rest of the Avengers for allowing it. And there were hints even back then, politicians demanding the Avengers being held accountable.
These so-called heroes have to be held responsible for the destruction done to the city. This was their fight. Where are they now?
Next, there's Project Insight. In order to stop Hydra from killing 20 million people and establish tyrannical order, Steve decides to blow up the 3 helicarriers over a populated city.
Fire now.
But Steve...
Do it! Do it now!
While I would not hold that against him, considering he had no way of controlling these things, he's still indirectly responsible for the deaths caused by the helicarriers. Not to mention, that decision was part of a larger goal to dissolve S.H.I.E.L.D., America's most powerful defense agency, which also got rid of the main organization keeping the Avengers in check. And just like in 2012, we can see evidence of governments being unhappy with the heroes' decisions.
I don't know what there is left for him to say. I think the wreck in the middle of the Potomac made his point fairly eloquently.
Well, he could explain how this country is expected to maintain its national security now that he and you have laid waste to our intelligence apparatus.
This leads us to the least forgivable act, Ultron. Tony and Bruce decide in order to protect Earth from alien threats, they decide to use unstable alien technology and plug in it directly into the internet without any safeguards, surveillance, or any team or government consultation.
So you're going for artificial intelligence and you didn't want to tell the team?
That's right. You know why? Because we don't have time for a city hall debate.
Not to mention, Ultron as a concept comes from Wanda messing with Tony's mind, and both she and her brother helping Ultron for the first half of that film. This leads to the world almost being annihilated, hundreds if not thousands of deaths on the ground, and the erasure of a small Eastern European country. We see the reaction of the public in full force in this film.
His name was Charlie Spencer.
Finally, Lagos. Unlike the previous examples dealing with an alien invasion, Nazis infiltrating governments, and a robot eliminating all of life, this is a relatively low-level threat. Steve, Nat, Sam, and Wanda all managed to stop Crossbones from stealing a bioweapon, but in the process of trying to stop Rumlow from exploding the marketplace, Wanda moves the explosion into a hospital. She could have thrown him very high up into the air, far away from the buildings. Instead, her negligence caused her to direct the bomb towards a civilian area, making her responsible for those deaths. The fact that this battle took place in another country also highlights the other problem with the Avengers: international law. As Ross points out, they often ignore the consent of sovereign nations in order to conduct unilateral unsanctioned missions as a group of American heroes. We even saw hints of these at the beginning of Age of Ultron. Not to mention the fact that the Avengers are all unsupervised enhanced individuals, mostly through expensive and dangerous means. They can cause damage at any time, whether intentionally or not. Regulation of superpowers was a thing in this universe since Iron Man 2, when you had one guy in a mech suit. Now we have 12 of these type of things. Any world would demand accountability. So, agreed upon by 117 countries, the Sokovia Accords will prevent disasters like Ultron from being created, provide accountability from civilian casualties, and decide if the Avengers or a regular police force is sent instead. On the other side of the scale, we have the plight of the Flag Smashers. When Thanos snapped his fingers and wiped half of the population, it would have caused massive amounts of non-snap casualties. One of the few world-building changes we were told about is the collapse of governments in Endgame.
World governments are in pieces. The parts that are still working are trying to take a census, and it looks like he did.
We are told that in this series that it resulted in most, if not all, countries opening their borders to snap. This led to the world's communities being more united than ever.
For 5 years, people have been welcomed into countries that have kept them out using barbed wire. There were houses and jobs. Folks were happy to have people around to help them rebuild. It wasn't just one community coming together, it was the entire world coming together. And then boom, just like that, it goes right back to the way it used to be.
Something that I find incredibly unlikely, considering that the resulting power vacuum from the government's collapse would cause wars, genocides, and political uprising from people trying to be in power. Not to mention, I don't understand why this would mean that the citizens would have to move to other countries and change their entire way of life, as opposed to take the available spots in their own country. But anyway, so millions of immigrants were taking advantage of all the voids left by the snap, only for the Avengers to bring everyone back with no warning and or modifiers when using the stones. This led to the creation of the Global Repatriation Council, a government-sanctioned organization meant to set back everything the way it was pre-2018. This would include resetting the old borders and giving back the homes to the original occupants. The Flag Smashers' goal is to stop the GRC from doing its job by any means necessary, and the show does a really bad job of showing the evils of the GRC. We really have only one scene to demonstrate how it neglects the non-snap victims.
The Global Repatriation Council promised to send more teachers, supplies. That was 6 months ago.
If you were demanding teachers 6 months ago, which would have been the day everyone was coming back, then you are definitely part of the lucky ones. There are many people who don't even have homes, food, or clean water, and you're complaining about not having enough teachers when you can still run a school? There was some balls. In short, even before they started burning people to death, it's hard to determine who is at fault here when it comes to the Flag Smashers versus government, considering the complete lack of on-screen proof, most of which comes from neglected world building from the 5-year time jump, as opposed to the events in prior films serving as the proof of the negligence in Civil War. So that is the context for both of our scenes, so now let us analyze these two debates in question, starting with Civil War.
Secretary Ross has a Congressional Medal of Honor, which is one more than you have.
So let's say we agree to this thing. How long is it going to be before they LoJack us like a bunch of common criminals?
So we start with the two best friends of our leads arguing. Rhodes, who is still part of the military, was chosen to protect the president and gladly took the job of overseeing Tony while drunk driving in his suit. But Sam no longer works for the government after an incident with his wingman, which also serves as nice foreshadowing for later. We have the former citing Ross's credentials and the amount of countries involved, while the latter brings up the possibility of imprisonment.
In the 8 years since Mr. Stark announced himself as Iron Man, the number of known enhanced persons has grown exponentially. During the same period, the number of potentially world-ending events has risen at a commensurate rate.
Vision, a logically driven android powered by the Mind Stone, brings a traditional equation found in superhero media that follows a logical chain of events in this universe. Ironmonger, Abomination, and Whiplash all result from an attempt to outdo their respective superheroes. Loki's actions in both Thor 1 and the Avengers are a result of Thor. He was sent to Earth as punishment, which led to the fight with the Destroyer, which led to the Chitauri invasion.
Because of him. Last year, Earth had a visitor from another planet who had a grudge match that leveled a small town. We learned that not only are we not alone, but we are hopelessly, hilariously outgunned.
Our work with the Tesseract is what drew Loki to it, and his allies.
It is a signal to all the realms that the Earth is ready for a higher form of war.
The subsequent invasion of New York basically defined the conflicts of Phase 2, with the creation and rise to power of many threats as the US government, S.H.I.E.L.D., and Tony Stark find new ways of trying to protect the world.
Listen, the Pentagon is scared. After New York, aliens, come on. They need to look strong.
Ever since that big dude with a hammer fell out of the sky, subtlety's kind of had its day.
After New York, I convinced the World Security Council we needed a quantum surge in threat analysis.
This math is even applicable to this film. We have a confrontation with a villain that was created by Cap to the point of willing to blow an entire marketplace out of revenge. In addition to this reasoning, consider Vision's own existence. He was created to stop Stark's biggest screw-up. He will probably view oversight as the best way to break the cycle, especially since he understands the self-destructive nature of humans, given he said,
They think order and chaos are somehow opposites and try to control what won't be.
You're being uncharacteristically non-hyperverbal.
It's because he's already made up his mind.
Oh, you know me so well.
Steve and Nat, both of whom have seen Tony at their lowest and often take issue with his ego, notice Tony's surprising lack of communication. We now get to see Tony's reasoning for it.
That's what's going on, Cap. It's just pain. Putting coffee grounds in the disposal.
Here we can see Tony is trying to act like his quippy self, getting distracted with random things. But the reason for his lack of silence are then explained. The blood of an innocent child, the news he received earlier.
Oh, that's Charles Spencer, by the way. Computer engineering degree, 3.6 GPA. Charlie didn't want to go to Vegas or Fort Lauderdale, which is what I would do. He didn't go to Paris or Amsterdam. He decided to spend his summer building sustainable housing for the poor, guess where? Sokovia.
With this description, we get a name, a face, and an occupation that would increase the audience's sympathy. No one wants to see the death of those who are pure of heart, and it is something that is representative of a larger situation. This would be one of many similar stories. We can see here Tony looking back on the personality he had at the beginning of the first Iron Man, where he was still a hedonistic alcoholic jerk, symbolizing how far he has evolved. What's clever about the editing here is that we see Rhodey's face, Tony's best friend who would understand Tony's guilt complex, and has seen firsthand Tony's evolution, only to cut to Wanda's regretful face, which is natural considering she's just as responsible for the Ultron incident as Tony was. Chris Evans' performance here indicates a mixture of regret and resolution. While they may have caused damage, they still did their best to save the Sokovians, which was Cap's entire tactics in that fight, where the focus was to save every civilian.
Stark finds a way to blow this rock.
Not till everyone's safe.
Everyone up here versus everyone down there, there's no math there.
I'm not leaving this rock with one civilian on it.
There's no decision-making process here. We need to be put in check. Whatever form that takes, I'm game. If we can't accept limitations, we're boundaryless, we're no better than the bad guys.
Tony's statement here is a complete reversal of his position in Iron Man 2, where he believed he was the smartest man in the room. But Tony's arc from selfish to selfless in Phase 1 led to a price, the curse of knowledge. The knowledge that his suit of armor was just a tin can compared to what was out there. This man who realized for as hard as he can try to protect the world through technology and smarts, he could be outsmarted by unknown forces like gods and alien armies, leading to make radical decision for the protection of Earth. From working on 30 suits in his basement, alienating him from Pepper, or trying to create an AI network to create peace in our time, the solutions ended up backfiring, leading him to realize that he may not be as smart as he is. But Steve has a response.
Guys.
Tony, if someone dies on your watch, you don't give up.
Who said we're giving up?
We are for not taking responsibility for our actions. This document just shifts the blame.
Sorry.
Steve's point here is that the Accords will change nothing in terms of collateral damage. He sees it as just a way from taking away the feeling of guilt off the Avengers. Rhodey can immediately tell what Steve is thinking here.
This is the United Nations we're talking about. It's not the World Security Council. It's not S.H.I.E.L.D. It's not Hydra.
No, but it's run by people with agendas, and agendas change.
About the three organizations that Steve used to serve One tried to nuke Manhattan in 2012. One lied to the Avengers about the Tesseract and tried to pre-crime murder people in the name of security. And one destabilized governments for 70 years in an attempt to establish tyranny. The point here is that unlike S.H.I.E.L.D., which is an American espionage agency that hired German scientists like Zola, the United Nations is a collection of different governments that can keep each other in check. Steve retorts,
No, but it's run by people with agendas, and agendas change.
That's good.
Steve's reply here indicates how far he has come. His motivation at the beginning of his first solo film was to serve his country, and it was still his motive after coming out of the ice, to serve the organization Peggy and Howard founded. But he started to see how much systems are rolling to go in the name of the greater good. He decided that he and his teammates are better off making the decisions themselves.
That's why I'm here. When I realized what my weapons were capable of in the wrong hands, I shut it down, stopped manufacturing.
Tony's guilt complex that is brought up calls back to an idea from his speech that started his character arc from his first film.
I saw young Americans killed by the very weapons I created to defend them, and I saw that I had become part of a system that is comfortable with zero accountability.
Tony may not have always been pro-government, but he will be ready to admit when he needs accountability. Nevertheless, Steve disagrees.
You chose to do that. If we sign this, we surrender our right to choose. What if this panel sends us somewhere we don't think we should go? What if there's somewhere we need to go and they don't let us? We may not be perfect, but the safest hands are still our own.
Freedom has always been a consistent value of Steve.
But we did it so that people could be free. This isn't freedom. This is panel sends us somewhere we don't think we should go. What if there's somewhere we need to go and they don't let us? We may not be perfect, but the safest hands are still our own.
Cap's savior complex will always make it so that he cannot just sit back and have someone else tell him when to save lives, as he says later.
If I see a situation pointed south, I can't ignore it. Sometimes I wish I could.
It is also a situation that he found himself in his first movie when he was forced to become a celebrity by the army, while he was forbidden to participate in the war. To summarize, we have our two protagonists changing into the opposite of how they were. The government creation put too much faith in the system and ended up almost helping his old enemy taking over the world. And the self-made weapon who privatized world peace put too much faith in himself and ended up almost destroying the entire world. We then get Tony's second argument, an argument backed by Natasha.
If we don't do this now, it's going to be done to us later. That's the fact. That won't be pretty.
Maybe Tony's right. If we have one hand on the wheel, we can still steer. We have made some very public mistakes. We need to win their trust back.
Focus on.
Natasha's stance here is one of public pressure. Her primary goal since Avengers 2012 was the same as Tony, to atone for the innocent lives she took as a Russian spy by signing up for S.H.I.E.L.D., only to realize she was adding more red to her ledger when S.H.I.E.L.D. turned out to be Hydra. The Accords highlight the blood of innocents taken during the team's mission. She is simply trying to protect her friends from the wrath she was presented 2 years ago, an event she is reminded of.
Aren't you the same woman who told the government to kiss her ass a few years ago?
Her perspective is that by pleasing the government is the better path to protect the Avengers, and eventually become independent rather than reject the Accords and have the government force the law on us. As she says later, Nat also wants to make sure the family she cares about stays together, a family responsible for her more warm demeanor since Winter Soldier, with Age of Ultron giving us the reason for her desire for a family. It seems that we get a closure to the argument, only for the news of Peggy's death to chime in, preventing Steve from responding. But it's this death that gives us the reassurance of Steve's stance, Peggy's motto, standing your ground, the core of Captain America's character.
Compromise where you can. But where you can't, don't. Even if everyone is telling you that something wrong is something right. Even if the whole world is telling you to move, it is your duty to plant yourself like a tree, look them in the eye and say no. You move.
Which gives us the end of the debate.
I can't sign it.
We ultimately end with the two sides reaching an agreement and the realization that both parties have differing values that can never be reconciled, while still acknowledging that there is no hard feelings. Overall, we have a scene that lasts about 4 minutes. We have 7 characters disagreeing on a contentious issue. Each character gives their perspective, with reasoning that aligns, that calls back to previous installments. Motivations range from guilt, faith in politicians, statistics, public pressure, moral beliefs, and caution. No character is put down and all characters maintain a mature tone, and this conversation leads to world-building change that affects all of Phase 3, leading up to their inability to stop Thanos in Infinity War. Now, let's look at how Falcon and the Winter Soldier did it. After Carly is shot by Sharon, who by the way just saved his life, Sam transports her body outside in a hilarious shot. This person who blew up buildings, threatened Sam's family, tried to kill Sam, Bucky, and John Walker, almost burned a bunch of senators alive, stole resources, and injured civilians in the first episode alone, in an effort to destabilize the world's geopolitics because she's upset she could not take advantage of a world tragedy anymore. And I guess we're supposed to be sad about that. We open with the senators thanking Sam for saving them, with a complete lack of reaction from Sam.
Are you still going forward with resetting the borders?
So this line confirms that the borders are not just open and more welcoming, they are flat out gone. Something to keep in mind.
Our peacekeeping troops will begin relocating people soon. The terrorists only set us back a bit.
You have to stop calling them terrorists.
I mean, they literally use lethal violence on civilians in pursuit of political aims, which is the literal definition of terrorism.
Your peacekeeping troops carrying weapons are forcing millions of people into settlements around the world, right? What do you think those people are going to call you?
What a false equivalence. Are you saying they deserve to have members of their personnel killed because they relocated people on their side temporarily because of a crisis?
These labels, terrorist, refugee, thug, they're often used to get around the question why.
So none of these terms are pejorative, Sam, unless you count thugs. Refugee is simply someone who is fleeing from their country. It's a term most refugees would not be upset to be called with. Terrorist is an extreme term, but the Flag Smashers have more than earned it.
Yes, and the people who reappeared only to find someone else living in their family home. They just end up homeless?
Finally someone asks a good question. Why are the governments evicting people from their homes? This question from the senator highlights the moral complexity of this issue and how pleasing one side will result in another side being upset.
Look, I get it, but you have no idea how complicated this situation is.
Alright, Sam, this is your chance to say something useful. Tell them something that can be put to good use.
You know what? You're right. And that's a good thing.
What? You just admitted you don't know anything about the situation and you think that's good? That you're in a position to lecture them?
We finally have a common struggle now. Think about that.
No, Sam, answer the question. Tell them how they're supposed to do the situation correctly.
For once, all the people who've been begging, and I mean literally begging for you, to feel how hard any given day is, now you know.
Imagine unironically victim blaming the people you just saved, who just survived a near-death experience, simply because they have to deal with a really complex problem instantly.
For once, all the people who've been begging, and I mean literally begging for you, to feel how hard any given day is, now you know. How did it feel to be helpless? Now, if you could remember what it was like to be helpless, and face a force so powerful it could erase half the planet, you would know that you're about to have the exact same impact. This isn't about easy decisions, Senator.
You just don't understand.
I'm a black man carrying the stars and stripes. What don't I understand?
This is not the same thing. You're comparing your job as a mascot with your main duties to stop bad guys to a group of politicians sitting around making decisions for millions of people. Plus, America has already shown to accept black superheroes with the American Stars and Stripes. We saw that in Iron Man 3. But this is something to keep in mind for later.
Every time I pick this thing up, I know there are millions of people out there who are going to hate me for it. Even now, here.
I feel it. The stares, the judgment. And there's nothing I can do to change it. Yet I'm still here. No super serum, no blonde hair or blue eyes.
The only power I have is that I believe we can do better.
Okay, in what sense?
We can't demand that people step up and we don't meet them halfway. You control the banks. Shit, you can move borders.
Okay, have we gone off the rails? No, governments can't control the banks. We can't just ask them to print more money. And you can't just move borders. It would completely screw over the idea of sovereignty. You would be destroying people's cultures and their way of life in general.
You can knock down a forest with the email. You can feed 1 million people with the phone call.
No, we can't just double food and houses in an instant. Especially not after the blip caused us to have to double our production on everything. But apparently Sam believes that the government has an automatic save the world's problems button that we are just refusing to press.
But the question is, who's in the room with you when you're making those decisions? Is it the people you're going to impact?
Or is it just more people like you?
But that's what they've been doing the whole time. The organization was founded to help people. This advice means nothing unless you're willing to go deeper.
I mean, this girl died trying to stop you. And no one has stopped for 1 second to ask why.
We know why. She's an entitled idiot, and it doesn't matter what she thinks. An opinion you seem to agree with when it comes to other villains you fought like Hydra, Zemo, or Thanos.
You've got to do better, Senator. You've got to step up.
And there it is, folks, the oh-so-memetic line. What does do better mean? What is the concrete, workable solution to this problem?
Because if you don't, the next Carly will. And you don't want to see 2.0.
You've given us no advice other than try harder. How are we supposed to enact true change that pleases everyone? And wait a minute, didn't you say a minute ago that we shouldn't be worried about what others have to say? But now you're saying that we should listen to the Flag Smashers because they might strike back? So which is it, Sam?
People believed in her cause so much that they helped her defy the strongest governments in the world. Why do you think that is?
By that logic, we should have listened to the Nazis in World War II because a lot of people believed in their cause. Just because a lot of people believe in a cause does not mean they are right.
Look, you people have just as much power as an insane god or a misguided teenager. The question you have to ask yourself is, how are you going to use it?
No, they don't. They don't have an Infinity Gauntlet. Say that to the Avengers, the people who actually had the Infinity Gauntlet and could have solved all the world's problems by actually reversing time instead of just resurrecting everybody. Also, she's not a teenager, she's a legal adult that led this terrorist group. So that's it. The Patch Act was interrupted by the Flag Smasher attack, and Sam just gave them a big speech against this vote. So what is going to happen now?
The group had opposed the global relocation efforts of the GRC, who just this week had announced changes in their own...
Oh, so the GRC have abandoned the Patch Act apparently. So nothing has really changed in terms of the status quo. We are still in a borderless society, which is not only insane considering it would completely derail the geopolitical landscape from territory management to security to cultural identity erasure, but blatantly contradicts prior films like Far From Home, whose plot is reliant on Peter going to other countries. And the world does not suffer the consequences of this scene like everything else in Phase 4. So, in total, we do not have a debate of ideals, we have a rant written by an 8-year-old. A bunch of empty platitudes that offer no useful advice or guidance. The only thing we learn from this speech is that he doesn't understand how the world works. So, now that we have our two scenes, what is the main difference between these two political debates? Well, I think it boils down to 6 factors. Number 1, parallels to the real world. The Sokovia Accords pose a question that is relevant to today's world. The disregard of vigilantes towards international law and collateral damage. The Flag Smashers' ultimatum does not. killing half the world at once and resurrecting that half 5 years later cannot happen in our world. Number 2, build up. The Accords are the result of several movies worth of foreshadowing and breadcrumbs of previous events in the MCU. Up until those accidents became too much, the world needed to respond. The state of the world post-snap and blip was information invented for this show, stemming from the event of one film, and only exists because of the lack of care for the world building in the 5-year time jump. Number 3, showing versus telling. Civil War gives us a clear visual evidence in the form of footage from battles that give us concrete proof of the reckless acts of the Avengers. By contrast, we never see the GRC's daily operations, or what the life of the Flag Smashers was before the unsnap. We therefore have nothing to compare to and no sure way of determining who's at fault, or why we should empathize with the point of view of the villains. Number 4, accountability of the protagonists. The Accords are all about questioning and reevaluating the consequences of our main characters, putting their actions in a different light. In Sam's speech, the blame goes to a bunch of nameless stock politicians so the audience can use them as a punching bag, while the Avengers' role in reversing the 5 years with no preparation or mitigation goes entirely unmentioned. Number 5, consequences. The Accords end up transforming the heroes from beloved private super beings into disgraced icons, with half of them fugitives, one injured, and one distrustful of his former friend, setting the stage for their eventual loss in Infinity War. In Falcon and the Winter Soldier, there is no status quo change. We're still in a borderless society, which is a status quo that is not reflected in any other MCU media post this show. And finally, number 6, argumentation. In Civil War, we have 6 main characters discussing an issue with constant back and forth, and the ultimate resolution coming down to an acceptance of one's determination rather than one side winning. In Falcon and the Winter Soldier, we have a childish rant from the protagonist, with senators being prevented from contributing and accepting every stupid word like docile puppies and never stand up for themselves, while the secondary main characters congratulate him for it. It's entirely one-sided, with Sam being the clear winner of this debate, despite all the signs pointing to the contrary. And that is why, ladies and gentlemen, Steve Rogers will always be Captain America, and Sam Wilson will always be Falcon. If you want to hear more from this channel, then please like and subscribe. It will be really good for my channel going forward. I plan to make more videos like this, so keep in touch.